part 7 picks back up on part 5 because we're talking about John Brown and the Harpers Ferry raid, or the raid on Harpers Ferry. So ever since his exploits in 1856 as a Free State guerrilla chieftain in Kansas, John Brown had been evolving an audacious plan for strike against slavery in the South itself. Brown was a Calvinist. Now remember, in part 1 we talked about Calvinist ideology and Calvinism being an activist faith, meaning that you were required by God to do some type of action to advance society or to advance God's will. So he was a Calvinist who believed in a God of wrath and justice. His favorite biblical passage, this John Brown we talking about, was, "Without the shedding of blood there is no remission of sin." John Brown was certain that he was God's instrument to carry out the task. He planned to lead a raiding party into the Virginia mountains. From there he would attract slaves from lowland plantations to his banner. He thought he would arm them and establish a freedmen's republic that could defend the mountain passes against attack. He thought they would move southward along the Appalachians and inspire slave insurrections until the whole system collapsed. A wild scheme, but from 1856 to 1859, he shuttled back and forth between Kansas, the Northeast, and settlements from former slaves in Canada, recruiting volunteers, raising money, and writing the Constitution. This is where he eventually, recruited Dangerfield Newby. So Gerrit Smith, Thomas Wentworth, Higginson, Theodore Parker, and 3 other Massachusetts abolitionists constituted a secret six who helped Brown raise money in New England. There will be no action if you can't put any money behind it. That's a fact. So they went and raised money in New England. Disguised as funds for Kansas, these funds were used instead to buy arms and supplies for Brown's invasion of the South. The abolitionists who supported Brown had become convinced that moral and political actions against slavery had failed. From the Kansas-Nebraska Act to the election of Buchanan and the Dred Scott decision, slavery had gone from one victory to another. Therefore, a violent counterstrike was necessary. Brown planned to capture the federal arsenal at Harpers Ferry, Virginia, and with the weapons seized there, armed the thousands of slaves he expected to join him. In the summer of 1859, he rented a farm in Maryland across the river from Harpers Ferry and began gathering his 17 white and 5 black recruits. Dangerfield Newby is one of those 5 black recruits. Harpers Ferry was a military trap situated between the confluence of the Potomac and Shenandoah rivers. He failed to inform any of the relatively few slaves in the area of his intentions. He neglected to reconnoisseur the terrain around Harpers Ferry to work out an escape route. He did nothing about laying out supplies or establishing a defensive line for the inevitable counterattack. But on October 16, 1859, they seized the undefended Arsenal Armory and the rifle works at night. Having gained his initial objectives, Brown seemed not to know what to do next. He sat down to await slave reinforcement, but the only blacks who joined him were a handful of bewildered slaves gathered up along with the white hostages by patrols sent out by Brown for the purposes. Local citizens and nearby militia companies organized on October 17th and captured the bridges across from Harpers Ferry. During the night of October 17th and 18th, Colonel Robert E. Lee surrounded the engine house and the next morning stormed the building. The raid was put down in 36 hours. In one sense, the raid was an utter failure, but in another sense, it was successful because it hastened the Civil War. The act may have been foolish, but the man was right. Brown's raid also evoked the deepest, darkest fears of Southern whites, the violent slave revolt. The Democratic Party split along sectional lines, Northern Democrats and Southern Democrats. Meanwhile, Republicans nominated Abraham Lincoln. Once again, during the campaign and the contest in 1860, it was actually a 2-party contest in each section. Lincoln versus Douglas in the North and Breckinridge versus Bell in the South. Nearly every Southern spokesperson in the Lower South threatened or warned secession if a Republican president was elected. The outcome was Lincoln won with 54% of the popular vote. He won the absolute majority in all but 3 of the northern states. Lincoln did not win one single southern state because he was not on the ballot. Breckinridge won the South. And with that, we have the succession of the Lower South.